The first scream came at dusk, thin as a cracked bell, sharp enough to cut the wind. Eleanor Pike heard it from the graveyard gate. She had one foot in the stirrup, the other still on the blood-wet ground, and the mare beneath her snorted at the smell of death. The scream rose again, higher, desperate, a woman in the throes of birth or dying. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She kicked free, let the reins fall, and ran toward the sound with her midwife's satchel slapping her hip like a second heart. The town square was empty. Doors barred. Windows shuttered. Yellow quarantine flags hung limp from every porch. Smallpox had come to Dry Creek 2 weeks ago on a drummer's coat, and now the air itself felt poisoned. Eleanor's veil, thin muslin, once white, now gray with ash and sweat, fluttered as she ran. The scars on her face and neck itched beneath it. She didn't care who saw. She had stopped caring the day the pox took her beauty and left her alive. The scream came from the livery stable. She shoved the doors wide. Inside, a girl, no more than 16, lay on a bed of straw, legs splayed, skirt soaked crimson. Her mother knelt beside her, wringing a rag that had long since lost its water. The girl's eyes rolled white. "Help her," the mother begged. "They said you're the plague witch, but you're all we got." Eleanor dropped to her knees. The girl's pulse fluttered like a trapped moth. The baby was breech. The cord pulsed around its neck. Eleanor's hands, scarred, steady, moved fast. She pressed her ear to the girl's belly, listened for the second heartbeat. Faint. Too faint. "Boil water," she ordered. "Clean knife. Whiskey if you have it." The mother ran. Eleanor worked alone in the lantern glow, whispering the old words her own mother had taught her in a Kentucky holler. "Easy now, little one. The world's hard, but you're harder." She turned the baby with fingers that had delivered 100 infants and buried 50. The cord slipped free. The girl screamed once more. Then silence as the child slid into Eleanor's palms, blue and still. She didn't breathe. Eleanor flipped the infant, struck its back once, twice. A cough, a gasp, a thin, furious cry that shattered the stable like glass. The mother sobbed. The girl fainted. Eleanor wrapped the baby in her own shawl, threadbare calico, stitched with tiny crosses, and laid it on the mother's chest. Outside, thunder growled. The first fat drops of rain hissed on the tin roof. That was when she saw him. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the storm, a tall man in a black duster, hat low, face shadowed. In one hand he held a shovel. In the other, a lantern that swung like a pendulum. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat onto the dirt floor, each drop a small dark star. "You the midwife?" His voice was gravel dragged over iron. "I am." He stepped inside. The lantern light caught his face. Hard lines, eyes the color of winter river ice, a mouth set like a locked gate. A scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his lip, pale against sun-dark skin. He looked at the girl, the baby, the blood, then at Eleanor. "Name's Jonah Vale," he said. "I dig graves." They buried the drummer at dawn. Jonah had already marked the plot, 6 feet by 3, on the hill behind the chapel where the soil was soft and the wind never stopped. Eleanor stood at the edge, veil lifted now, scars bared to the gray light. The preacher refused to come. The town watched from behind curtains. Only the mother and the girl, still weak, baby bundled tight, stood with them. Jonah lowered the pine box with ropes he'd braided himself. No words. No prayers. Just the scrape of dirt on wood. The thud of the first shovelful. When it was done, he drove a plain cedar marker into the earth. No name. Just a date. April 12, 1868. Eleanor watched his hands. Big, calloused, knuckle-scarred. Hands that had tied nooses she'd heard. Hands that had hanged men in San Antonio before the war. Then buried boys in blue and gray after. The town called him Hangman Jonah. They said he slept in the graveyard. That he spoke to the dead. He didn't speak now. Just nodded once at the mother, tipped his hat to Eleanor, and walked away. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet cedar and turned earth. Eleanor lingered, touching the marker. The baby's cry echoed in her mind, alive against the odds. She mounted her mare and rode back to her shack on the edge of town, where the pox-scarred lived alone. The pox spread like gossip. By the end of the week, 12 were sick. 8 dead. The general store closed. The saloon boarded its doors. Children were locked in attics. Mothers burned sage and prayed to saints they'd forgotten. Eleanor moved from house to house, a ghost in muslin, delivering brewer's yeast and willow bark tea, stitching wounds, holding hands that went cold in hers. She knocked on doors that cracked open just enough for her satchel to pass through. Plague witch, they whispered, but took her remedies anyway. Her scars burned under the sun, a map of her own survival. Pockmarks like craters on her cheeks, neck corded with raised tissue. She'd been 20 when the fever hit her homestead. Now at 25, she was the town's reluctant savior. Jonah dug. Morning to night. One grave, then another. He worked alone. No one helped. They left coins on the fence post. Payment for the dead. He never touched them. His shovel bit into the earth with mechanical rhythm, muscles straining under his duster. Eleanor passed him once, carrying a body wrapped in sheets. Their eyes met briefly. Hers weary, his unreadable. He nodded, kept digging. One night, Eleanor found him in the chapel ruins. The roof had collapsed years ago. Pews rotted under stars. He sat on a fallen beam, whittling a small wooden cross. His knife moved slow, deliberate. Shavings curled like pale prayers at his boots. "You'll run out of hill," she said, sitting beside him. He didn't look up. Ground's deep. Plenty of room. The cross was for a child, no bigger than her hand. She recognized the name carved in tiny letters. Lucy May, 5 years. Her mama asked for angels, he said. Best I can do. Eleanor took the cross. Her thumb traced the wings he'd carved. Delicate, almost alive. It's beautiful. He shrugged. Dead don't care. Living do. She handed it back. Why angels for her? Jonah paused, knife still. Saw her play once. Chased butterflies like they were secrets. Angels fit. Eleanor nodded, thinking of her own lost child. The night air cooled. Crickets filled the silence. The fever raged on. Eleanor lost a farmer's wife at midnight. Her last words a plea for her children. Jonah buried her at first light, the grave shallow from the rocky soil. Eleanor stood watch, veil discarded now. Too stained, too heavy. Her face fully exposed, she felt the stares from distant windows. Jonah finished, wiped sweat from his brow. You eat? He asked gruffly. She shook her head. He pulled a biscuit from his pocket, hard as stone but warm. Take it. She did. They shared the moment in quiet, the hill their only witness. Days blurred. Eleanor delivered a stillborn, her hands trembling for the first time in years. The mother wailed. Jonah arrived silently, shovel over shoulder. He dug while Eleanor comforted, then helped lower the tiny coffin. "Why do we keep going?" she murmured as dirt fell. Jonah leaned on his shovel. "Because stopping means they win, the pox, the pain." His eyes held ghosts. She saw her own reflected. That night she couldn't sleep, the scars itching like fresh wounds. The fever broke in the 3rd week. Not from medicine, there was none, but from rain. 3 days of it, hard and cleansing. The creeks ran red with clay. The pox scabs dried and fell. The town exhaled. But the damage was done. 18 graves on the hill. A chapel burned by frightened men who thought fire purified. A silence heavier than smoke. Eleanor's hands were raw from washing linens and lye. Her veil was gone, torn to bandages. The scars on her face and neck shone silver in the sun. Children stared. Women crossed themselves. Men looked away. She didn't care. She had saved 9. Lost 9. The math was cruel, but it was hers. Jonah stopped digging. The hill was full. He started on the flats, lower ground, near the creek where willows grew. He marked each plot with a stone, not a cross. Said wood rotted. Stone remembered. One afternoon she found him there, knee-deep in mud, shaping a headstone with a chisel. The name, Martha Creek, Midwife, died 1859. "My ma," he said without looking up. "Pox took her too. I was 12. Watched her burn from the window." Eleanor sat on a stump. "You carve her name like you're afraid to forget." "I already forgot her voice," he said. "This is what's left." She watched the chisel bite stone, sparks of memory in each strike. They began to meet at dusk. Not by plan. Just happened. She'd finish her rounds, checking pulses, changing dressings, teaching mothers to boil water. He'd finish his digging. They'd meet at the creek, sit on the same flat rock and say nothing. Sometimes she brought cornbread wrapped in cloth. He brought coffee boiled over a campfire. They ate in silence. The water talked for them. One night she asked, "Why'd you quit hanging?" He stared at the current. Hanged a boy in 64. 16. Stole a horse. Judge said make an example. I tied the knot. He pissed himself. Cried for his mama. When he dropped, his voice cracked. I heard her scream in my sleep for years. He picked up a stone, skipped it across the water. 3 bounces. Sank. After the war, I dug instead. Same hands. Less screaming. Eleanor reached into her pocket, pulled out a small tin. Inside, a lock of hair, dark and fine. My daughter, she said, died in my arms. 1865. I was 23. Same pox. He took the tin, held it like it might break. You kept her. I keep everything, she said. It's how I stay alive. Jonah returned the tin gently. The creek murmured on, carrying their shared grief downstream. They sat longer that night, the first stars pricking the sky. The town turned on them in July. A dry wind came, hot and mean. Crops withered. Wells shrank. Tempers flared. Someone remembered the midwife with the scarred face. Someone remembered the hangman who spoke to ghosts. Someone said they'd brought the pox. Someone said burn them out. It started with whispers, then rocks through windows, then a cross burned in the square. Cedar, stolen from Jonah's stack. Eleanor was in the Jenkins barn, delivering twins, when the mob came. She heard the shouts, the crackle of torches. The mother, half mad with pain, begged her to hide. Eleanor kissed the newborns, wrapped them in her shawl, and walked out into the firelight. 20 men. Rifles. Torches. The preacher at the front, Bible in one hand, kerosene in the other. "Witch!" he shouted. "You cursed this town." Eleanor stood in the barn doorway, blood on her apron, twins in her arms. "These children cursed?" she asked. "Born tonight. Healthy. You want their blood too?" The preacher faltered. The mob shifted. Then Jonah stepped from the shadows. He carried no gun, just the shovel. Its blade glinted like a moon. "First man through that door," he said, voice calm, "gets this in the skull." The mob hesitated. They knew the stories, knew what those hands had done. Eleanor walked forward. The twins cried. She didn't flinch. She stopped in front of the preacher, looked him in the eye. "You want to burn something," she said. "Burn your fear. These children need milk. This town needs healing. I'm tired of burying your hate." She turned, walked back into the barn. The mob watched. No one moved. Jonah followed, closed the door, barred it with the shovel. Inside, the mother wept. The twins nursed. Outside, the torches guttered in the wind. Hours passed. The mob dispersed at dawn, shame heavy as their boots. Eleanor tended the family, her hands steady despite the blisters from the birth. Jonah stood guard, shovel ready. "They'll come again," he muttered. She nodded. Then we faced them. For the first time their hands brushed, accidental, electric. Neither pulled away. Word spread of the standoff. Some townsfolk left food at Eleanor's door. Apples, bread, a quiet thanks. But fear lingered like smoke. Jonah carved a new headstone that day, not for the dead, but for the living. Hope and Mercy Jenkins, born July 10th. Eleanor watched, the twins asleep in her arms. "You give them names already?" "They need 'em," he said. "World's hard on the unnamed." They left at dawn, not running, walking. Eleanor carried the twins in a sling against her chest. Jonah carried a crate, inside. Her midwife tools, his carving knife, the tin with a lock of hair, the small wooden cross for Lucy May. They took the old wagon trail east, toward the piney woods where the land was cheap and the pox hadn't reached. Behind them, Dry Creek smoldered, not from fire, but from shame. They didn't speak for miles. The babies slept. The wheels creaked. The sun rose red. At a crossroads, Jonah stopped the mule. He pulled a small bundle from his coat, cloth, soft, faded blue. He unfolded it. Inside, a silver thimble, worn smooth. "My ma's," he said. "She sewed for the regiment. Said every stitch was a prayer." He placed it in Eleanor's hand. "For the next baby you deliver. So you remember you're not alone." She closed her fingers around it. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out the cedar cross he'd carved for Lucy May. She pressed it into his palm. "For the next grave you dig," she said. "So you remember you're not damned." They looked at each other. No vows. No rings. Just the weight of what they'd survived. The trail wound through scrub oak and mesquite. Dust rising like ghosts. The twins fussed. Eleanor hummed a lullaby from her Kentucky days, voice soft and scarred like her skin. Jonah led the mule, shovel strapped to the wagon side. "Why east?" she asked finally. "Netch's river. Good water. Soft soil for burying if need be. Room to build." She nodded. "And for living." They camped that night under a live oak, fire small to avoid eyes. Jonah whittled while Eleanor nursed the twins. Stories came in fragments. His war days, her lost homestead. Hands touched again, deliberate now. Days turned to weeks. They claimed 40 acres on a river bend. The cabin was half rotted, roof open to the sky. Willows thick as secrets. They fixed what they could, patched walls with mud and moss, thatched the roof with palmetto. Slept under stars when rain came. The twins, named Hope and Mercy, grew fat on goat's milk and sunshine. Eleanor planted herbs. Willow bark, sage, yarrow. Jonah cleared a meadow for graves, but hoped it stayed empty. Word spread. A woman with scarred hands who could bring life from death. A man with gentle hands who could lay the dead to rest without judgment. They came, orphans, widows, men with shaking fevers and shaking souls. The cabin grew. A barn. A chapel made of pine and river stone. No steeple. Just a bell Jonah forged from an old plowshare. Eleanor delivered babies under lantern light. Jonah carved headstones with names and dates and sometimes a flower, a horse, a star. They buried the dead in a meadow where bluebonnets grew thick every spring. One night, years later, a boy came. 12, maybe 13, leg twisted from birth. He carried a bundle, a rag doll, a broken slate, a letter from a dying mother. Eleanor took him in. Jonah taught him to whittle. The boy called them Ma and Pa without being told. That winter, the river froze. They sat by the fire, the boy asleep between them. Eleanor stitched a quilt from scraps. Calico, flour sacks, a piece of Jonah's old duster. Jonah carved a cradle from willow wood. He looked at her across the flames. "You ever think we'd end up here?" She smiled, small, real, the scars pulling tight. "I think we were always headed here. Just took the long way." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. The thimble glinted on her finger. Not a ring, but close enough. Outside, snow fell soft on the graves. Inside, the fire crackled. The boy breathed steady. The cradle waited. They never married. No preacher would come. No record was kept. But every spring, when the bluebonnets bloomed, the children ran through the meadow shouting, "Mar-el, Pa Jonah." Look, the flowers came back. And Eleanor would stand on the porch, scars silver in the sun, thimble flashing as she waved. Jonah would lean on his shovel, hat low, a quiet smile on his face. The town that burned them out sent a letter once. An apology. A request for the midwife. Eleanor wrote back, "We are home. Plant your own mercy." She signed it. Eleanor Pikevale, midwife. Jonah Vale, keeper of the dead. Parents to the living. Underneath, in Jonah's careful script, love is the only grave that never fills. The sanctuary thrived. More came, runaways, the broken. Eleanor taught midwifery. Jonah, carving and quiet strength. The boy's leg eased with thyme and herbs. Bluebonnets returned yearly, a promise. In the pines, scars faded to stories. Hands intertwined in purpose. Love unspoken rooted deep.